Welcome to Get Motivated with Dr. Donato, a show designed to reach you where you are, focusing on the fact that you can be anything you want or desire. All you have to do is get motivated. If you need a challenge in your life, then look no further. Get Motivated with Dr. Donato starts now.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Get Motivated with Donato. I'm your host, Dr. Donato here. And today I am excited about our guest. I've known this person way too long, 30 years or so. And a good friend of mine, actually more so like a brother to me, Brett Attwood. Welcome, Brett.
Nice to be here. It's been a long time coming. We haven't had a chance to actually collaborate and sit down and do this.
Yep. So we were in Stories of His Glory together. And this is your chapter here. Yep. So I wanted to get into the spirit of that anyway, and we might talk about something else if it comes up, because we just flow good anyway. But
We do.
I wanna start out and treat you just like I do everyone else, and give you an icebreaker question here, which is, if you could meet anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
Oh man. Well, the obvious, of course, would be go back in biblical times and sit down at the feet of Jesus. I mean, that would be the most awesome to meet, as far as an author or as a figure. I mean, you've got different people like Winston Churchill, or different people that maybe be one of the disciples or something, that foundations of our quote unquote religious faith. But it would have to be Jesus, of course. But there are others, like I mentioned, that would be interesting to meet some different people from different heritage and different maybe some of the from my Viking heritage would be interesting to meet.
Yeah,
But
no doubt.
definitely would have to be Jesus and the disciples, to be able to sit there at the feet of Jesus with the disciples and see the miracles. See them, see the miracles firsthand would just be amazing.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. So the title of your chapter is "God is My Co-Pilot." So
it doesn't just come from all the driving, but it kind of does.
Well, and that's kind of what your story is about a little bit. So is that why you titled it that way?
Well, it is. I mean, the original thing from the story with my grandmother and driving along back in 1995 on the freeway, I mean, that was he had to have been my co-pilot, because there were things that like I said, I've driven anything and everything like you have, and I considered myself a good driver, even sporty cars, race cars, and stuff like that. But I don't know how I did the maneuvering. So in my life and the things that we see going on the road with all of our travels from one side of the country to the other, there's so many things that that song, Jesus Take the Wheel. Well, he's already got the wheel. I mean, he's got to be our co-pilot, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. All the crazy stuff that we've seen happen to other people.
Well, and it's interesting just the way you said that last part, because to some degree, right? I mean, we always say co-pilot because that's a term that we're used to in our modern day. But really, Jesus needs to be the pilot, right?
Right.
He needs to be the one that tells us what to do, and we're the co-pilot. So that's where I think some of that terminology was good for a time, right? But just like how the Bible says, we go from glory to glory to glory. We need to, like like that was one thing we learned when we were younger, right? God's our co-pilot. Like, cool, he's always with us, and that's awesome. But now we need him to be like our pilot and really instruct us, to lead us, to guide us.
Then that's
You
going to
know?
have to be the next chapter.
Yeah. So I mean, like we need to start kicking it up a notch, I think, in our Christianity. But so that's what I want to talk to you about today, because that's, your chapter was largely about your life experience, really. Yeah, it has a lot to do with that experience you just mentioned when you're a teenager, and we'll get to that too. Um, but you were raised in a Christian household. Um, I wasn't, right? So some of us are, some of us aren't. But you actually got saved at a young age. So, like, tell us a little bit more about that background, about that experience.
Well, it was kind of funny. I was always a silly kid, but I knew quite a bit. I was raised, like I said, in church, but I always felt more fascinated with the adult church than with the kids' church. Yeah, the kids' church and the stories and the singing and all that was well and good, but I actually sat down and listened to the sermons with the adults, and I actually told my mother, I said, there was just some stuff with Sunday school. I just didn't like it. I'd rather sit in an adult church. And even at a young age, I wanted that. Um, I wanted that experience and that feeling because, like I said, I didn't really get the spiritual food that I needed, even in those regular services. There was more. I wanted the spirit. I wanted to be spirit filled and feel all of this. And so when I was a kid, that was one of those things. And I don't know why I even understood. It was funny because when I was, oh goodness, I'm trying to remember how old I was, 6 or 8. It was really young. I told my mother, I said, I want to pray to be saved. And I said, you go in my bedroom, I'll go in your bedroom, and we'll pray together. And even then, it was like go into your prayer closet and pray. I don't know. It was just funny. But it was like, um, even then, I kind of understood and wanted more. So even though I was raised family devotions every night, there was a devotional, or my dad would read a passage out of the Bible, or we would whatever, and they would pray and I would pray. And, I mean, it started out as, now I lay me down to sleep. And I came up with my own versions of that. But then I kind of came up with my own prayers. And um, I don't know, and then as I got a little older, I just wanted to know more and do different stuff, and still didn't want to be in the kids' church, or even the teen church. I wanted to go to the big church because I wanted that word from, you know, I wanted to experience what the pastor felt like, was his word from God to preach that day, not just I don't know. I mean, it was like, I didn't want to be instructed like a little kid. I wanted to like get in it. It's like, no, skip all over that. Even now, like, forget the instructions. I want to just delve into what makes this thing work and rip it apart and figure it out. I don't want to break it, but I want to learn how it works.
Yeah.
And you're kind of the same way too. I mean, like when it comes to fixing stuff like a computer or whatever, I mean, you'll take a brand new computer and start hacking it. And I'm like, don't break it. And you're like, I know what I'm doing. I want to learn this. And, you'll
Yep.
have
I
the
used to do
brand
that.
new system completely hacked from the beginning, and it's like, yeah, forget auto setup. I'm going to custom install and set up this thing. So it was kind of like that. I mean, I really wanted to get into it. And of course, got on my own and kind of found stuff to occupy my mind, and um, not really get away from God, but get away from that fellowship. And but it was like, well, that was kind of the thing with the God as my co-pilot. Every time I would get a little bit sidetracked, it was always that. Sometimes it wasn't even just a still small voice. It was, you know, screaming at you, "Hey, what are you doing? Get over here!" And it was like, "Yeah, okay." I don't know. I mean, even to this day, I'll be, just messing on my phone, doing whatever dumb game or whatever thing, and all of a sudden it's like, put that down and start, you know, praying and listening to music or whatever, and got to get in that. I don't know.
Oh, that's good. I mean, so you were searching a little bit for God by the sounds of it, and in the book, in your chapter, you mentioned that you were starting to kind of do your own thing as a
Right.
teenager. And I think that's kind of
Yep.
what you're hinting at there just now.
Right.
So
Yep. That was
I want to get
working.
kind of a better understanding. I mean, was that like you're trying to be more like a prodigal or something else there?
So 17 years old. I was finishing up school.
It wasn't my
Um,
fault. No.
no, it wasn't your fault. No, you were actually one of the more stable things in my relationships with friends and faith. And I mean, we were still goofy and got into a little bit of healthier trouble. I mean, we never really got into major trouble other than maybe paying for one movie and seeing three. Uh, which we probably shouldn't have done, but now we couldn't get away with that kind of stuff the way that things are. But, little things like that. But for the most part, we were pretty good. And, but before that, even before I met you, um, I started at Radio Shack, got into computers and all that. And, it was some at home, but I really got into computers and, got in with the wrong crowd. Some people that were stealing stuff, stealing from Radio Shack. That's why I'm not there anymore. Is they stole 100 and something computers and laptop computers that were being sold, and I kind of got roped in as an accessory to it because I thought they were doing whatever, and I mean, I never saw a dime of it. I didn't steal from the company, but I guess looking back at it, I probably could have figured it out a little bit easier, a little bit
Guilt
sooner,
by
but
association.
pretty much. I mean, I was never charged with anything or whatever, but I did lose my job and had to kind of start over again because I was like in the middle of the whole thing, and there was several managers in Radio Shack that got let go because of the whole mess. But they kind of cleaned house and started over, I guess we could say. But along with that, one of the gentlemen that I was hanging out with was a big drinker. I got messed up with him, was hanging out, and um, one interesting story that kind of scared me straight with that is we were driving back from um, the Duluth area, the college that we'd met with, and it was foggy. I mean, it was really, really foggy to the point of where you're looking at the white line and the yellow line on the road just to be able to know where you are, and you can't see ahead of you. And I'm driving along at 60, 70 miles an hour, just hoping there's not something stopped in front of me. And probably wasn't the greatest of ideas either. But I remember I was not doing well. The gentleman was drunk and passed out in the passenger seat. And he was just going, I'm driving along and I'm like, I wasn't praying, but I was just kind of, oh God, I hope I get there. I hope I get there. And all of a sudden I look over at him and he's looking at me and his eyes were glowing red. I don't know if it was in my mind or whatever, but that's what I thought anyway. And I'm like, oh, the devil's sitting in the seat right alongside of me. And because we had just left a bar I think I probably had a drink, but I wasn't drunk like him. But I shouldn't have been drinking. Plus, I was 17. Uh, Beard and bald hair and head, and I didn't get carded anyway. So okay, I'll order a Bud Light or whatever. So I'm sitting there and driving, and he had looked right over at me, and those eyes, and I looked back, and again, if it was in my imagination or if I was tired or whatever, but I still remember that to this day, and it was like that's one reason I can't stand being around drunk people and in weird establishments where everybody's just all falling all over the place. Relationships with girls or whatever, if they're drunk or whatever, and uh, hugging on you and whatever, it's just go away. I don't know. It's just been one of them things, and I've never wanted to be out of my consciousness and be drunk myself. I don't like that experience. Another
So
reason
you kind of
why.
almost played around with the prodigal style of living,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
but
yeah.
it also turned you off at the same time and came you back towards
Well, I
God.
had that faith and that strong rooting into it, and where yours was kind of different in some aspects, but you also saw, you know, what it did to your dad and different things in your life. And so, part of that's probably one of the reasons why you stayed away from that kind of thing as well, because
Yep.
we both had, it was a different life experience, but it was really the same outcome, even though you hadn't, uh, really experienced what with your faith yet.
Right. I
You
kind of grew
still,
up in that prodigal living because of
right,
my dad and ran away from it. And you
exactly.
didn't, but ran to it and then ran away from it.
Right. Well, and I think for me, it was so much of my freedom. I am grown up. I'm doing my own thing. I'm going to be 18 in 6 months, and I'm able to drive, and I'm working, and I mean, and I was working, and I was making good money, and a manager at Radio Shack at 17. I was the youngest manager in Radio Shack history at the time, and my parents were very proud of me. And then all of a sudden, it just fell
Fell
apart.
apart.
But
Yep.
the reason it fell apart, I think, also was God, because had it not fallen apart and we'd gotten away with all of that and I'd gotten roped into it and seen the fruits of it and then become a part of it, and then my life might have taken a totally different turn, and I could have ended up way worse and not
Yeah.
come back from it, and ended up an alcoholic, ended up who knows what, and a
Yeah.
thief, and and then eventually sure would have caught up with me if I had actually gotten roped into it, but by the grace of
I
God I
mean,
didn't.
in a sense, because the prodigal son story is one of my favorites, right?
Yeah,
You're kind of that modern day in an example
pretty
because
much.
you grew up under the father's household, right, or your parents, and a
Mhm.
good household, but you're like, I want to be my own person, so I'm going to go do this, do what I want to do, and then you get caught up in it, and then you're like, I don't really like this, so I'm going to go
Right.
away from it back to the household, the comfort, the safety that I knew, and that's good. It's just always interesting that I've because not being a Christian growing up and finding Christ when I was a youth, right? And having those experiences, like I mentioned, with my dad growing up, just living in the world, right? It's
Right.
it's easy to flip that switch and just be like, well, why would you ever want to go back there? And it's like it seems like most Christians that grow up like you did in that Christian environment, they almost always stray, because they don't know anything else, right? And when they get on their own, they 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 do that. and then they
Right.
hopefully come back, because there's a scripture, you know, it says, train up a child in the way they
No
should
way.
grow. When they
So,
grow old, they won't depart
they
from it.
won't depart from it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're the total example of that. So, I mean, that's cool. It's just unfortunate, like our choices and our decisions, because a lot of what you just shared touch on a few different things. And everything we do is a choice. It's a decision that we make. From the littlest things, like what are we going to have for breakfast today, right? Or even bothering to get up out of bed for the day, you know? Whatever it is, everything is a choice and decision, no matter how small or how large it is. You know, and we gotta understand, kind of like what you were hinting around or talking about, the choices and decisions we make can and do have repercussions or circumstances that happen because of one thing or another. You know, there's fruit, like you mentioned, that comes out of those choices and decisions that we make, you know, and then how do we live with those consequences? So obviously you made a quick turn. You saw what that lifestyle was like and you got away from it right away.
I'm still tempted by stuff though, and I mean, even to this day, it seems like, you know, when things are going right, as you know, the devil tries to get in and mess stuff up because, well, let's see, what is this weakness, or what is this, or how can I get him down, or how can I get whatever. And it seems like that's the thing when you're based as a Christian as a child, and it's like, okay, well, be it, you know, alcohol, drugs, women, whatever, these things that are a temptation or a desire for somebody, especially a teenager becoming an adult. Well, okay, now you're old enough to do this or that, or now you have your freedoms, your car, your whatever, you can drive and you kind of go do this and that. So for me, I think it was more the fact that, well, you're tempted by these things. So well, now I can go do those things because I don't have to answer to anybody. Or even if I did, I'm away from it. So what they don't know won't hurt them. And so you can kind of, get away with, doing this or what we have on our phone, and we can, nobody knows what I've got here. So I can look at it, and I can do whatever. Well, God knows what you're doing, whether you know or not. And so, you're constantly tempted by, whatever, or constantly plagued by whatever, what do you want to call it? And it seems like, that's what happens to a lot of people that are of the faith, because if they're presented with another opportunity, then they can go, well, if nobody knows, maybe, or maybe it was just a story.
Well, and that leads into, you were talking about meeting Jesus, right? Meeting the disciples. As Christians, we're supposed to, or if we're going to call ourselves a Christian, right? That really means Christ follower, right? That's essentially a quick, easy definition of what a Christian is. And if you're following after Christ, that's the disciples. That's the same thing. A disciple is following after the teacher or the teachings of the teacher, right? And that's what we're striving for right now. Then we're learning about those things that Jesus taught us. And we're seeing those examples of like the stupid stuff Peter did, right? Or the bold stuff, or just the not thinking that Peter did. He's one of those biggest examples, I think, in the Bible,
Right.
and the story of Jesus there, because
Right.
Peter just would do anything,
Right.
And I don't know, like, how that might fit together with how we learn. I mean, what, you made a comment in your chapter about as you were growing up, because you were still searching, you were still going from church to church because you didn't really understand the denominational thing. You're just searching
Right.
for God. So, tell us a little bit more about that and how all of this kind of plays together with that background?
So my parents were from different denominational background. My father was raised in a more stiff and starchy type of a church that was more structured and didn't really flow with the spirit. I mean, they weren't bad churches, and they didn't preach things that were against the gospel, but they didn't preach the entire story, in my opinion. When I would go to my mother's church that she grew up with in northern Minnesota instead of near Minneapolis, where we lived, uh, I see things I didn't see before, speaking in tongues and more excitement and just everything was more in tune. I could feel it. I could enjoy it more. I could get more out of it. I could sit there and listen to the speaker speak and not be as bored or want to fall asleep or um, the stories were better. The vision was better. And then uh, Dan Betzer, who my mother got me these Dan and Louie Bible stories. So he has a dummy and he would tell a story and they would do the silly things and it was wonderful and like for my kids. He was the head of the Assemblies of God for years and now pastored the Silver Dome down in Fort Myers, Florida, and now I guess his son has taken over. He's elderly now and still speaks sometimes, but not like he did. But he would be on the Revival Time radio broadcast and he would speak. And there was just something about the way he spoke and his stories and this depth of, uh, I was just mesmerized with him. I always wanted to listen to him. Then I found out you could get a transcript of his sermons. So they put them all in a book. Every month they'd send out another one and another one. So I would get every single one of those. I would read his sermons. And you could just I mean you could follow it. It wasn't like a just this guy up there saying, okay, well, I'm going to preach on so and so. I mean, you could actually feel the vision. I mean, it would just flow with him, and you could tell that. So, and then started going to Living Word and some different other different churches, and it was like because my cousin went there even before we started hanging out and going wherever, and so I had been there. I didn't even know you were going there. You were probably there in the youth group while I was in the other you know, I, I didn't even know it. And so after we met, right around the same time with the Radio Shack thing, 1995, 94 actually, but we we officially started hanging out in 95, 96. Um, but we met in 94, I believe. Um, it it just was that depth, I guess you could say, of what I would feel, and that's where I wanted to go. That's where I wanted to, and then I found out that you knew the church and the people, this that, and it was more common ground, and through this Radio Shack mess, I met someone that took me to the place that I met you, and then another friend and different things throughout our lives, and then it just kind of uh, we've been, like you said, brothers for 30 years now. And it's just not only brothers in Christ as well, as almost like, family. So, and it's been quite the journey. And now to, have not only my brother in Christ, my pastor and my professor all at once is very, I mean, we have had quite the growth in our faith in both of what we have seen and done. It's been very interesting. And I still struggle with stuff and call you in the in the middle of the night or text you to pray about whatever. And,
Yep.
it's like there's a connection there. But once again, God is my co-pilot, and I yeah, you could say actually the pilot.
All right. So I've still got a lot of questions to ask you. And we're going to have a part 2 of this for people for next week. So until then, be blessed.
Follow Dr. Donato on Facebook and LinkedIn at Donato Parisi, or go to donatomotivates.com. Remember, you can be anything you want or desire. All you have to do is get motivated.